Ever find yourself wishing for maybe a bit of a shortcut, you know, to better metabolic health?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
something a lot of people are thinking about, looking for ways to support their bodies, especially with things like blood sugar.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to today's topic, berberine. It's this natural supplement getting quite a bit of buzz.
Right, for potentially helping with blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, maybe even cholesterol, and other metabolic stuff.
And for this deep dive, we're digging into a discussion that's really grounded in clinical experience, which I think is super valuable.
Yeah, it's less theoretical, more about how it's actually being used, what doctors are seeing day to day.
So the idea is to figure out how this supplement, berberine, might actually fit into your own health journey, listener.
Exactly, a practical look. So maybe we start right at the beginning. What is berberine fundamentally?
Good question. Lay it on us.
Okay, so berberine, it's not new, really. It's a compound, a chemical that you find in several different plants.
Plants had been used for a long time, right?
A very long time. We're talking traditional medicine systems, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, phytotherapy. It has roots way back.
Okay, so it's got history. What are the key things it's supposed to do according to the source material we looked at?
Well, the big one is improving what's called peripheral insulin sensitivity.
Meaning how well your muscles and tissues actually respond to insulin and take up sugar.
Exactly, which is, fundamental. Then there's mention of potentially helping with fatty liver,
Which is a huge issue these days.
huge, and also improving the lipid profile. So think cholesterol, triglycerides,
Okay.
lowering uric acid comes up too.
Uric acid. That's the gout connection.
That's the one. And finally, maybe reducing that low-grade chronic inflammation that seems to underpin so many health problems.
Wow, okay. It sounds like it hits quite a few different areas.
Yeah.
The source even compared it to metformin,
Yeah, it used the phrase sort of analog to metformin.
which is like the go-to drug for blood sugar management for many people.
Right, because metformin improves insulin sensitivity and glucose control. The source suggests berberine does something similar, particularly on that peripheral insulin sensitivity side.
Interesting. So maybe working in a slightly different way than metformin, which focuses more on the liver's glucose production.
Potentially, yes. The nuance might be in where it primarily acts berberine perhaps more strongly on those peripheral tissues, metformin more on the liver side, though both affect overall glucose. It's subtle, but could be important.
Okay, got it. So knowing what it might do, who are the people who might actually think about using it based on what clinicians are seeing?
Yeah, the source gives some good pointers. One group is people with high triglycerides, low HDL, that's the good cholesterol, and high LDL, especially if the ApoB fraction is up.
That ApoB, that's about the number of LDL particles, right?
Yeah.
Not just the total amount.
Exactly. And that whole pattern often points towards, well, increased cardiovascular risk, often seen in people carrying extra weight.
Makes sense. What else?
People with a lot of that deep belly fat, the abdominal visceral fat.
The dangerous kind we always hear about.
That's the one. Strongly linked to systemic inflammation. These folks might also have elevated liver enzymes like ALT and AST, suggesting some liver stress. Maybe fatty liver starting.
Okay, so high triglycerides, belly fat, maybe iffy liver tests.
Right, add to that elevated uric acid levels. And importantly, people with fasting glucose that's just slightly high.
Like not quite diabetic, but creeping up.
Exactly. The source mentioned the 110-115 milli-GDL range. Your regular doc might say, let's watch it, but it often signals problems with insulin already kicking in. High insulin, maybe?
Pre-diabetes territory, basically.
Pretty much. And if you bundle several of these things together, the lipids, the glucose, the belly fat, maybe blood pressure too, you're looking at metabolic syndrome.
So people diagnosed with metabolic syndrome are a key group too.
Definitely highlighted as potential candidates for considering berberine.
Okay, so listener, if that profile resonates at all, if this might be relevant, let's shift to the practical side then. How do people actually use it? Dosage, timing?
Right. The source gets quite specific here. The recommendation is usually to start low. 500 milligrams once a day.
Just once a day to start.
Yeah, and take it with your first solid meal.
Why with food? And why the slow start?
Food can help with absorption, but mainly it's about tolerance. Berberine can sometimes have a laxative effect, cause some diarrhea for some people.
Okay. So starting slow lets you see if that's going to be an issue for you.
Exactly. Test the waters, basically.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Then what's the usual dose once you know you tolerate it okay?
The general maintenance dose, according to the source, is typically 500 milligrams in the morning and 500 milligrams at night. So a total of 1,000 milligrams per day split.
Okay, 1,000 milligrams split between morning and evening. Is that standard for everyone?
Mostly for men and women, but the source did mention that for larger men, maybe over 90, 95 kilos, say around 200, 210 pounds,
Yep.
they might go up. Maybe 1,000 milligrams in the morning and 1,000 milligrams at night. So 2,000 milligrams total per day for bigger guys.
Okay, so dose might scale a bit with body size. And I think it mentioned different capsule strengths are available.
That's right. You can find 800 milligram capsules, for instance, which just makes it easier if you're taking those higher doses, fewer pills to swallow.
Right, convenience factor. Now, for people with metabolic syndrome or obesity, the source stressed using it daily, consistently. Why is that continuous use important?
The thinking is you need that ongoing support. To keep improving insulin sensitivity day after day, help keep glucose levels stable, encourage the body to burn fat.
Mhm.
It's often used alongside things like low carb or keto diets where the effects might kind of add up, work synergistically. The goal isn't a quick fix, it's sustained metabolic improvement.
Continuous support makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, this was really interesting, adjusting the dose around strength training. That's not something you hear about often.
No, it's quite a nuanced point. The source suggests that really high doses, like consistently over that 1,000 milligrams a day, maybe even closer to the 2,000 milligram,
Yeah.
might not be ideal if your main goal at that moment is building muscle hypertrophy.
Why would it interfere with muscle growth?
Well, it comes back to insulin. Berberine helps make your cells more sensitive to insulin, which is great for blood sugar control. But
Right.
when you lift weights, you actually want a decent insulin spike afterwards. Insulin helps drive glucose and amino acids into the muscle cells for repair and growth. It's anabolic.
Ah, so berberine might slightly dampen that beneficial post-workout insulin spike.
That seems to be the concern, yeah. It might blunt that signal a bit.
So what's the practical advice then if you're lifting weights and taking berberine?
The suggestion is to think about timing. If you train in the evening, maybe take your berberine in the morning. If you train in the morning, maybe take it at night.
Create some separation between the dose and the workout window.
Exactly. Try to let insulin do its thing more freely around the workout. And the source even mentioned that on really heavy training days or days you're deliberately carb loading,
Yeah.
you might even consider skipping the berberine entirely that day, just to maximize that muscle recovery environment.
Wow, that's really specific advice, tailoring it quite finely.
It is. It shows a deeper level of thinking about how these things interact.
Definitely. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. There was a connection mentioned between berberine and SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. What's that about?
Yeah, this is super important, especially for men. The source states pretty clearly that berberine can increase SHBG levels.
Okay, quick refresher. SHBG, what does it do again?
It's a protein, mostly made in the liver. Its job is to bind onto sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen in your bloodstream.
So it carries them around.
Sort of, yeah. But when a hormone is bound to SHBG, it's generally considered inactive. It can't bind to its receptor and do its job. You need the free, unbound hormone.
So if berberine increases SHBG,
Then more of your testosterone gets bound up, meaning less free testosterone is available to your tissues.
which for men could mean lower active testosterone levels.
Exactly. The source gave an example. Some guys start on higher doses, maybe 1,500, 2,000 milligrams a day, see great metabolic results initially, but after 2 or 3 months, they might notice their free testosterone and maybe DHT levels have dropped, while their SHBG blood test shows a big jump.
Ooh, okay. That's a potential side effect to be really aware of.
Absolutely. The key takeaway is that as someone loses weight and their metabolic health improves, they might need to lower their berberine dose.
To avoid pushing SHBG too high and tanking their free T.
Precisely. It's a reminder that things change, and dosages might need tweaking over time. Your body isn't static.
Really important point. Now, sticking with hormones, the discussion also touched on polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, in women.
Yes, and here the effects seem potentially quite positive. A big part of PCOS often is that peripheral insulin resistance we keep talking about.
Which berberine helps with.
Right. But here's where the SHBG thing gets interesting.
How so?
In women with PCOS, they often have higher levels of androgens, like testosterone. That contributes to symptoms like hair loss on the head, maybe excess hair growth elsewhere, acne.
Right, hyperandrogenism symptoms.
Exactly. So if berberine increases SHBG in these women,
It binds up more of that excess testosterone.
potentially, yes. So the same effect that might be a concern for men could actually be beneficial for women with PCOS, helping to reduce those androgenic symptoms.
Huh. That's fascinating. So it could be a helpful tool for PCOS management.
It seems like a promising supportive option, yeah. Alongside other treatments, of course.
Good to know. Okay, there was also a quick mention of berberine as a natural antiseptic, kind of a different angle,
Yeah, just a brief aside. Some integrative practitioners apparently use it for gut health, targeting certain bacteria or maybe even parasites,
like cleaning things up in the gut.
something like that. And this effect might actually be linked to that diarrhea side effect we mentioned earlier.
Ah, because it's messing with the gut microbes.
Could be part of it, yeah. Disrupting the balance a bit, especially initially.
And the source said higher doses are sometimes used for this gut purpose.
Yeah, it mentioned doses like 2,000, 3,000 milligrams a day, sometimes being used specifically for GI benefits, which is quite a bit higher than the typical metabolic doses.
Okay, interesting side note. So let's wrap up with safety and side effects overall. We've covered the potential gut issues. What else?
Well, the main other point, and it's a critical one, was about use during pregnancy.
Right. You mentioned conflicting information.
Yeah. Apparently, some clinicians have used it to try and prevent gestational diabetes,
Huh.
but metformin is generally the well-established accepted choice for that. And, more concerning, the source highlighted reports and studies suggesting berberine might have a potential abortive effect.
Whoa. Okay, that's serious.
Very serious. So the strong recommendation from the source, given that risk and the conflicting data, is to absolutely err on the side of caution.
Meaning avoid it during pregnancy.
Yes. Prefer metformin if needed for gestational diabetes prevention. Don't take chances with berberine during pregnancy.
Crystal clear. Critical safety point. Outside of pregnancy, though, what was the general conclusion on safety?
The conclusion was that, when used appropriately within those discussed dosage ranges, the safety margin for berberine seems generally quite wide.
Okay, good to know. But that pregnancy warning is paramount.
Absolutely essential.
Right. Well, this has been incredibly informative. We've really covered a lot of ground on berberine. Maybe we can quickly recap the big takeaways.
Sure. So basically, berberine is this plant-derived compound. Looks promising for metabolic health, helping insulin work better, managing blood sugar, improving cholesterol, potentially helping fatty liver, maybe even reducing inflammation.
And we talked about who might benefit people with metabolic syndrome markers like high triglycerides, belly fat, slightly high blood sugar, even women with PCOS potentially.
Right. And the practical side, starting low at 500 milligrams once daily with food, typically moving to 500 milligrams twice daily, maybe more for larger men.
Don't forget the timing adjustments around strength training if muscle gain is a top priority.
Good point. And that key interaction with SHBG potentially raising it, which would lower free testosterone in men, requiring dose adjustments over time. But that same effect might help women with PCOS.
We touched on its antiseptic side use too, and the potential gut side effects.
And wrapped up with that crucial safety warning. Avoid during pregnancy due to potential risks. Metformin is the preferred agent there. Generally safe otherwise when used properly.
So the bottom line seems to be, berberine looks like a potentially useful tool, but it's definitely not a magic pill, right?
No, at all. The source really emphasized it should be part of a bigger picture. Good diet, exercise, sleep. Those fundamentals are still key. Berberine is potential support.
Makes total sense. So maybe a final thought for our listener to chew on.
Yeah.
Given everything we've unpacked today, if this sounds relevant to you, how might you bring up berberine with your own doctor or healthcare provider, thinking about your specific health goals and situation?
That's the perfect takeaway. It's about having an informed conversation tailored to the individual.